Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg, and I am here to do one of my favorite things to do every month, share with you the books that I have brought into my library in the month of August. That is right, it is book haul time. I have 11 books to talk to you about. I'm really excited about every single one of them. This is also a unique book haul. My August book hauls, which I talked about in my revisit for the month of August, I'll link that down below, have been pretty good because it seems like I have a good track record of reading the books that I bring into my library, and that will be true as we work our way through this. I think I have 11 books, and I've already read 4, and I'm working on a 5th. Let's dive in because, as I said, I'm really excited to talk about all of these books. The first one I want to talk to you about is Temple Folk by Aaliyah Bilal. This is a unique case because this is a book that was actually sent to me by the author. I have had authors reach out to me over the years, but usually the tone of the email is very like, hey, I love the way you talk about books. Would you review my paranormal romance? And let this be a PSA to authors. I am not your guy for paranormal romance. It is totally fine if that is your thing. It is a genre that is allowed to exist. I just don't read that genre at all. But Aaliyah Bilal reached out to me. And I had already been interested in this book, and she offered to send me a copy. So I said, sure. And this is sort of in exchange for an honest review of it. And she sent me this, and it is signed, which is really sweet. And I'm very excited to read this. Though this is the one that I am currently working on. I have only read one of the stories at the time I am filming this. And that one story was really good so far, so I'm looking forward to reading the rest of the stories that are in this collection. One of the things that is really exciting to me about this is the list of people who have given this book a blurb on the back. Edward P. Jones, who won a Pulitzer Prize for The Known World. Disha Philyaw, who wrote My Beloved, The Secret Lives of Church Ladies. Angela Flournoy, who wrote a book called The Turner House that I have not really had reason to talk about on my channel. I read it before I had a booktube channel, and I really liked it. So I love seeing her name on anything. And Marlon James, who won a Booker Prize for A Brief History of 7 Killings. That's a great list of authors who are supporting Temple Folk by Aaliyah Bilal. This is published by Simon & Schuster, and I'll read you a little bit of what it is about. I could kind of tell you since I'm already reading this, but I want to make sure I get it right. In Temple Folk, Black Muslims contemplate the convictions of their race, religion, economics, politics, and sexuality in the United States. The 10 stories in this collection contribute to the bounty of diverse narratives about Black life by intimately portraying the experiences of a community that resists the mainstream American culture they are pushed to aspire to and accept. In Due North, an obedient daughter struggles to understand why she's haunted by the spirit of her recently deceased father. In Who's Down, a father, after a brief affair with vegetarianism, conspires with his daughter to order a double cheeseburger. In Candy for Hanif, a mother's routine trip to the store for her disabled son takes an unlikely turn when she reflects on a near-death experience. In Women in Niqab, a daughter's suspicion of her father's infidelity prompts her to wear her hair in public. In New Mexico, a federal agent tasked with spying on a high-ranking member of the Nation of Islam grapples with his responsibilities closer to home. With an unflinching eye for the contradictions between what these characters profess to believe and what they practice, Temple Folk accomplishes the rare feat of presenting moral failures with compassion, nuance, and humor to remind us that while perfection is what many of us strive for, it's the errors that make us human. And I think you can see why this is something that really caught my attention. I love stories about the different facets of a community because it is so easy to just think of a community as this monolith, and that is not really how communities work. People are different, and there are all kinds of spectrums of humanity that happen to align with a certain group, and I love that. And I love that this is a population that is not traditionally centered in literature, and if it is usually in a very stereotypical way. That is one of the things that got me really excited to read this book. That is Temple Folk by Aaliyah Bilal. In my book hauls, I like to read a little bit from the opening of each book. In this case, I'll read a little bit of the opening story in the collection, which is called Blue. In the early hours before the dawn, the women of the Muslim girls' training class stood single file on the sidewalk, waiting to board the Trailways charter bus headed to Chicago. A pair of street lamps at the corner of Prospect and Main funneled soft light into their frames, dressed in peacoats with long white skirts and headscarves that matched the light drift of the snow. That's the opening of Temple Folk by Aaliyah. Bilal, again, that is the one that I'm currently reading and I'm really excited to finish. Now we get to one of the ones that I have already read, Absolution by Alice McDermott. I read this last week as I'm filming this, and I discussed it in my most recent Friday Reads video. I will link that Friday Reads down below because I discuss a book by an author who will be coming up soon in that Friday Reads as well. I'm going to keep doing this as I film because I just love the way the light plays off this cover of Absolution by Alice McDermott. This is published by FSG. It is not released yet. I was feeling bold after I was approved for 2 advanced readers copies in recent months, since June, I believe, and I reached out when I heard about this book, and they approved my request and sent me this beautiful, beautiful copy. It's not something I usually do. I never really get anything from authors either, so this is a very unique and new book haul for me in a lot of ways. I already read this and I really enjoyed it, and I'm very, very much looking forward to other people getting to read this book. So I've seen the release date listed online as October 31st, but the book says November 7th. My message to you is check in with your local independent bookstore, check in with bookshop.org or your local library. Pre-order this book or put a hold on it, because I think this is a book that a lot of people are going to be talking about. Alice McDermott is a good author. She's been a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize 3 times. Spoiler alert, we're going to be talking about that in a second. And this is a book that seems like a contender for the New York Times Best Books of the Year, could be a contender for the Pulitzer Prize, maybe the Women's Prize. A lot will depend on how this book is received once it comes out, but I feel like this is a book that is going to be in the mix for conversations that we are going to be having by the end of the year. I'll read you the back of the book because, again, I've read this, I could describe it, but let's go with what the marketing copy says. American women, American wives, have been mostly minor characters in the literature of the Vietnam War, but in Absolution they take center stage. Tricia is a shy newlywed married to a rising attorney on loan to Navy intelligence. Charlene is a practiced corporate spouse and mother of 3, a beauty and a bully. In Saigon in 1963, the 2 women form a wary alliance as they balance the era's mandate to be helpmeets to their ambitious husbands with their own inchoate impulse to do good for the people of Vietnam. 60 years later, Charlene's daughter, spurred by an encounter with an aging Vietnam vet, reaches out to Tricia. Together, they look back at their time in Saigon, taking wry account of that pivotal year and of Charlene's altruistic machinations, and discovering as they do how their own lives as women on the periphery of politics, of history, of war, of their husbands' convictions, have been shaped and burdened by the same sort of unintended consequences that followed America's tragic interference in Southeast Asia. A virtuosic new novel from one of our most observant, most affecting writers about folly and grace, obligation, sacrifice, and finally the quest for absolution in a broken world. Again, I feel like you can immediately see why this is a book that jumped out to me as something that I immediately wanted to read. Usually, and I talked about this in my Friday Reads video, but usually when you read anything about the Vietnam War, it is set later in time. It's set when things are already out of control, the violence is already spreading, and things are just very bad. This is set in the before times. Kennedy is still president when this book begins, or when the story of this book begins. And the other thing that is very unique about this is that it is a Vietnam story that centers on women, which you sort of got from the blurb. And that is also a very unique take. Not just wives at home, women who are there, present in Saigon in the early days of the war. It's a very interesting book. I would recommend that you think about pre-ordering it or reaching out to your library to see if they are going to be getting a copy. Here is the opening of Absolution by Alice McDermott. There were so many cocktail parties in those days, and when they were held in the afternoon, we called them garden parties, but they were cocktail parties nonetheless. You have no idea what it was like for us. The women, I mean. The wives. The opening chapter of this book, by the way, functions like an extremely good short story. I'm kind of tempted to continue reading it, even though I just started, because it's that good. Again, that's Absolution by Alice McDermott, coming out either October 31st or November 7th. I've seen it both ways from FSG. Really good book. So I was in my local used bookstore just the other day, And I went through the sale section where they have books that are basically for $1. And then because they're for $1, you can't return them. And I stumbled on a copy of At Weddings and Wakes by Alice McDermott, which is one of the books that she was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for. So because I had just finished Absolution, because I did kind of enjoy it, because this is a Pulitzer Prize finalist, I think this is the book that was beaten by A Good Scent from a Strange Mountain by Robert Olin Butler for the Pulitzer Prize. I could be wrong about that, but it's also very short. You could dunk this in your coffee. So I figured no harm in purchasing this for $1 and expanding my collection of Alice McDermott books. So here it is. And there is no description of what this book is about on the back of the book. It is also published by Farrar, Straus and Giroux. So let me just really quickly pull up a description that I can read to you. All right, here we go. Lucy Daly leaves suburbia twice a week with her 3 children in tow, returning to the Brooklyn home where she grew up and where her stepmother and unmarried sisters still live. The children quietly observe Aunt Veronica, who drowns her sorrows in drink, Aunt Agnes, a caustic career woman, and finally Aunt May, the ex-nun blossoming with a late and unexpected love, dutifully absorbing the legacy of their less than perfect family. Alice McDermott beautifully evokes 3 generations of an Irish-American family in this haunting and masterly work of literary art. So there you have it. I am looking forward to reading this. I don't have immediate plans. This is more of a library builder's, but I am definitely intrigued by the career of Alice McDermott. And since there is also a Pulitzer connection with this book, it seems like something that would be good for me to have in my library. Here is the opening of At Weddings and Wakes by Alice McDermott. Twice a week in every week of summer, except the last in July and the first in August, their mothers shut the front door, the white 8-panel door that served as backdrop for every Easter, First Holy Communion, confirmation, and graduation photo in the family album, and with the flimsy screen leaning against her shoulder, turned the key in the black lock, gripped the curve of the elaborate wrought iron handle that had been sculpted to resemble a black vine, curled into a question mark, and in what seemed a brief but accurate imitation of a desperate housebreaker, rung the door on its hinges until, well satisfied, she turned, slipped away from the screen as if she were throwing a cloak from her shoulders, and said, "Let's go." That is the opening paragraph and the opening sentence of At Weddings and Wakes by Alice McDermott. Then we have a book that I've heard a lot of really good things about. It's Hello Beautiful by Ann Napolitano. In particular, I believe that Bookish Bear on Instagram has referred to this as his favorite read of the year. I don't know if that has changed in the month of August, but it has had a good run as his favorite book of the year so far. And I've just heard some good things about it. I have heard people compare it to Demon Copperhead. Of course, if you follow along, you know Demon Copperhead was my favorite read from last year, so that immediately had me intrigued. This is published by the Dial Press. Here is what this is about. By the way, it has been blessed by Oprah, if that is a thing that means anything to you. Can love make a broken person whole? William Waters grew up in a house silenced by tragedy, where his parents could hardly bear to look at him, much less love him. So when he meets the spirited and ambitious Julia Padovano in his freshman year of college, it's as if the world has lit up around him. With Julia comes her family, as she and her 3 sisters are inseparable. Sylvie, the family's dreamer, is happiest with her nose in a book. Cecilia is a free-spirited artist, and Emmeline patiently takes care of them all. With the Padovanos, William experiences a newfound contentment. Every moment in their house is filled with loving chaos. But then darkness from William's past surfaces, jeopardizing not only Julia's carefully orchestrated plans for their future, but the sisters' unshakable devotion to one another. The result is a catastrophic family rift that changes their lives for generations. Will the loyalty that once rooted them be strong enough to draw them back together when it matters most? An exquisite homage to Louisa May Alcott's timeless classic Little Women, Hello Beautiful is a profoundly moving portrait of what is possible when we choose to love someone not in spite of who they are, but because of it. That connection to Little Women was really interesting when I saw this in a store, and that is one of the things that finally inspired me to say, you know what, I really need to get a copy of this book, and hopefully at some point soon, I will get around to reading it. Here is a bit from the opening of Hello Beautiful by Ann Napolitano, again published by the Dial Press. Chapter 1, William, February 1960 through December 1978. For the first 6 days of William Waters' life, he was not an only child. He had a 3-year-old sister, a redhead named Caroline. There were silent home movies of Caroline in which William's father looked like he was laughing, a sight William never saw again. His father's face looked open, and the tiny redhead, who pulled her dress over her face and ran in giggling circles in one of the movies, was apparently the reason. Let's stop there. That is the opening of Hello Beautiful by Ann Napolitano. A very intriguing opening. I had not looked at the opening sentence, but it really caught my attention. Now we get to Commonwealth by Ann Patchett. This is the book that I referenced earlier when I talked about Absolution. So in the same Friday Reads video where I talk about Absolution, I talk about Ann Patchett and my history as a reader with Ann Patchett, because not to get into it all over again, but when Run was released, I read it and I really did not like that book. And it soured me on Ann Patchett for a very long time, to the point where when people would reference, say, Commonwealth when it was published, I would just kind of think, I'm glad you liked it, that's great, and then I would avoid reading Ann Patchett. When The Dutch House was released, I admit I was a little curious, but I still resisted the impulse and just let other people sort of enjoy that book on their own terms and avoided reading it. But I was getting a little curious because I kept hearing good things about her books. And, you know, you really can't judge an author based on one book. Sometimes somebody just has a bad book. Maybe they didn't mean to do the thing that you are sort of assuming they did. And I follow Ann Patchett's bookstore, Parnassus, on Instagram, and she appears a lot. And she's just this really delightful, charming presence on social media, which is funny because she does not own a cell phone. But that's neither here nor there. So I did a video in July about my most anticipated books for the last half of 2023. And then I did a video about whether or not, kind of sort of questioning, do I want to read these books? And I talked about Tom Lake in that video. And the comments really convinced me I need to give Ann Patchett another try. So I read or listened to Tom Lake and liked it a lot. The book that most people mentioned when they said you need to give Ann Patchett another try was Commonwealth. And it just so happens that I was in my local used bookstore and they had a nice hardcover edition of Commonwealth. So I decided to grab it. And here it is. And I'm looking forward to reading it. This is published by Harper. Here is what this book is about. One Sunday afternoon in Southern California, Bert Cousins shows up at Franny Keating's christening party uninvited. Before evening falls, he has kissed Franny's mother, Beverly, thus setting in motion the dissolution of their marriages and the joining of two families. Spanning 5 decades, Commonwealth explores how this chance encounter reverberates through the lives of the 4 parents and 6 children involved. Spending summers together in Virginia, the Keating and Cousins children forge a lasting bond on a shared disillusionment with their parents and the strange and genuine affection that grows among them. When in her 20s, Franny begins an affair with the legendary author Leon Posen and tells him about her family, the story of her siblings is no longer hers to control. Their childhood becomes the basis for his wildly successful book, ultimately forcing them to come to terms with their losses, their guilt, and the deeply loyal connection they feel for one another. Told with equal measures of humor and heartbreak, Commonwealth is a meditation on inspiration, interpretation, and the ownership of stories. It is a brilliant and tender tale of the far-reaching ties of love and responsibility that bind us together. Really looking forward to this. I've heard so many good things about this, and I'm glad that I finally got around to giving Ann Patchett another try. I'm glad that it went well. I'm glad that I want to read more of her work. So this is probably the one that I will do next, simply because it is the one that most people recommended when I talked about whether or not I want to read more Ann Patchett. Dutch House was a close second, so it is one that I will consider. Dutch House was also a Pulitzer Prize finalist, so I will always be interested in it because of that, but I think Commonwealth is the one that I will be reaching for next when I am ready to read another Ann Patchett book. Here is the opening of Commonwealth. The christening party took a turn when Albert Cousins arrived with gin. Fix was smiling when he opened the door, and he kept smiling as he struggled to make the connection. It was Albert Cousins from the district attorney's office standing on the cement slab of his front porch. He'd opened the door 20 times in the last half hour, to neighbors and friends and people from church and Beverly's sister and all his brothers and their parents and practically an entire precinct worth of cops. But Cousins was the only surprise. Let's stop there. That's the opening of Commonwealth by Ann Patchett. I was about to say another book I'm looking forward to, but I'm really looking forward to reading all of the ones that am talking about here that I have not read yet. Now we have The Lacuna by Barbara Kingsolver. I'm a fan of Barbara Kingsolver. I've read, first I read The Poisonwood Bible, loved it. I would said it was one of the best books of the last 25 years. I will link that video in the description box down below. I have read The Bean Trees, which I really liked. I read Unsheltered, which I think is a very flawed book, which I did find very interesting. I think it's a flawed book in a fascinating way. The Lacuna is a book of hers that I have not read, and it is one of the two books people point to the most when they talk about Barbara Kingsolver. The first one is The Poisonwood Bible, which I have already read and loved, and then you have The Lacuna, which is the book that won her the Orange Prize, which is now the Women's Prize. So she is now a two-time winner of the Women's Prize because Demon Copperhead won as well. I want to read more of her books. I've been collecting Louise Erdrich books, so at some point I can do a project and work through all of hers. I've been collecting Toni Morrison books, so I'm already sort of in the process of reading all of Toni Morrison's books, and I've been collecting Edna Ferber books. Barbara Kingsolver feels like part of this journey. I want to eventually have read all or most of her books, and The Lacuna feels like the next place that I should go because a lot of people love this book a great deal. So I found it at my local used bookstore, and here it is. In this powerfully imagined, provocative novel, Barbara Kingsolver takes us on an epic journey from the Mexico of artists Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo to the America of Pearl Harbor, FDR, and J. Edgar Hoover. The Lacuna is a poignant story of a man pulled between two nations, as well as an unforgettable portrait of the artist and of art itself. That is a very brief description. This is published by Harper Perennial. And let's do a bit of the opening of The Lacuna. Part 1, Mexico, 1929 through 1931. Isla Pixol, Mexico, 1929. In the beginning were the howlers. They always commenced their bellowing within the first hour of dawn, just as the hem of the sky began to whiten. It would start with just one, his forced rhythmic groaning like a saw blade. That aroused others near him, nudging them to bawl along with his monstrous tune. Soon the maroon-throated howls would echo back from other trees farther down the beach until the whole jungle filled with roaring trees. As it was in the beginning, so it is every morning of the world. That is the opening of The Lacuna by Barbara Kingsolver. Now we get to Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. This is another one of the books that I have already read. I read this when it was first released. I had gotten it from the library, and I really just wanted to have a copy of my own. It's something I've been thinking about over the years, and then when I did my video about the 25 best books of the last 25 years, this was one of the books that I included, and it was one of only 3 books on that list that I did not own. So I added it to my list of books that I look for when I am in a used bookstore, and I almost immediately found a copy of the paperback, so I brought it home. I'm not going to read the whole description. You know what? I've read it for the books that I've already read, so I'll just do that for you. But this is a very great and unique book, and I'm a huge fan of it. Ghana, 18th century. 2 half-sisters are born into different villages, each unaware of the other. One will marry an Englishman and lead a life of comfort in the palatial rooms of the Cape Coast castle. The other will be captured in a raid on her village, imprisoned in the very same castle, and sold into slavery. Homegoing follows the parallel paths of these sisters and their descendants through 8 generations, from the Gold Coast to the plantations of Mississippi, from the American Civil War to Jazz Age Harlem. Yaa Gyasi's extraordinary novel illuminates slavery's troubled legacy both for those who were taken and those who stayed, and shows how the memory of captivity has been inscribed on the soul of our nation. It's a fantastic book. So again, just to hammer in what the structure of this book is, you meet these 2 sisters who don't know that the other one exists. One is sold into slavery and sent to the United States. The other stays in Ghana. Every chapter after that jumps back and forth between the descendants of each sister and jumps forward a generation. So I have seen people complain that this feels like a collection of linked stories more than it feels like a novel. I've also seen people complain that because it jumps ahead every generation, you don't really get a single character to latch onto as a through line. I hear those complaints. I think the structure reveals so much about how the world has been impacted by enslavement, both in the United States and in Africa, that it is extremely powerful and well worth your time. This is an edition published by Vintage, and I would absolutely recommend it to you. I'm really happy to finally have a copy in my library. There's a family tree for you in the opening of the book. Part 1. Effia. The night Effia Otger was born in the musky heat of Fantaland, a fire raged through the woods just outside her father's compound. It moved quickly, tearing a path for days. It lived off the air, it slept in caves and hid in trees. It burned up and through, unconcerned with what wreckage it left behind, until it reached an Asante village. There, it disappeared, becoming one with the night. That is Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. I cannot recommend this book to you enough if you have not already read it. While I was browsing my local used bookstore at some point in August, I found a copy of A Lesson Before Dying by Ernest in that same section where books are $1. So I couldn't say no, because this is a book that has been on my radar for a very long time as something that I should get around to reading. This is not anything I have immediate plans to read, but it is the definition of a library builder, something that I'm happy to have in my library because I would like to read it someday. And if I have it in my library, maybe that day will be a little bit sooner. Here's what it says on the back. A Lesson Before Dying is set in a small Cajun community in the late 1940s. Jefferson, a young black man, is an unwitting party to a liquor store shootout in which 3 men are killed. The only survivor, he is convicted of murder and sentenced to death. Grant Wiggins, who left his hometown for the university, has returned to the plantation school to teach. As he struggles with his decision whether to stay or to escape to another state, his aunt and Jefferson's godmother persuade him to visit Jefferson in his cell and impart his learning and his pride to Jefferson before his death. In the end, the 2 men forge a bond as they both come to understand the simple heroism of resisting and defying the unexpected. I've heard so many good things about this book through the years. I really need to get around to reading it at some point, so I'm happy to have this edition in my library. It is published by Vintage, and here is how it begins. I was not there, yet I was there. No, I did not go to the trial. I did not hear the verdict because I knew all the time what it would be. Still, I was there. I was there as much as anyone else was there. Either I sat behind my aunt and his godmother, or I sat behind them. Both are large women, but his godmother is larger. She is of average height, 5'4", 5'5", but weighs nearly 200 pounds. Once she and my aunt had found their places, 2 rows behind the table where he sat with his court-appointed attorney, his godmother became as immobile as a great stone, or as one of our oak or cypress stumps. She never got up once to get water or go to the bathroom down in the basement. She just sat there staring at the boy's clean-cropped head where he sat at the front table with his lawyer. That is the beginning of A Lesson Before Dying by Ernest J. Gaines. Now, I have 2 books to talk about from Jesmyn Ward. So I was given access to Let Us Descend on NetGalley, so I read an e-galley of the book, and then almost immediately after I finished and did a review of this book, which I will link down below, it is not a spoiler review, it is spoiler-free, so if you are concerned about waiting for this book to be released, you can check it out for more information about my thoughts on this. But not long after I finished it, Joel entered a contest to win an advanced reader's copy on Instagram, and he won. So now I actually have a copy of the book. It doesn't have the actual design of the jacket. It has this quote of Jesmyn Ward with, a printed signature on it. This is a really terrific book. I'm sure a lot of people are looking forward to it. This is going to be published on October 3rd. So again, pre-order, head to bookshop.org, pre-order there, check with your local library. I'm willing to bet your local library is going to be getting a copy of this book. There's no description on the back or the front. So once again, I am going to refer to a website and tell you, Let Us Descend is a reimagining of American slavery as beautifully rendered as it is heart-wrenching. Searching, harrowing, replete with transcendent love, the novel is a journey from the rice fields of the Carolinas to the slave markets of New Orleans and into the fearsome heart of a Louisiana sugar plantation. Annis, sold south by the white enslaver who fathered her, is the reader's guide through this hellscape. As she struggles through the miles-long march, Annis turns inward, seeking comfort from memories of her mother and stories of her African warrior grandmother. Throughout, she opens herself to a world beyond this world, one teeming with spirits of earth and water, of myth and history, spirits who nurture and give, and those who manipulate and take. While Ward leads readers through this descent, this, her 4th novel, is ultimately the story of rebirth and reclamation. From one of the most singularly brilliant and beloved writers of her generation, this miracle of a novel inscribes Black American grief and joy into the very land, the rich but unforgiving forests, swamps, and rivers of the American South. Let Us Descend is Jesmyn Ward's most magnificent novel yet, a masterwork for the ages. And again, I have a review of it that I will link down below. This is published by Scribner. Here is the opening of the book. You're going to love the way this opens. It is a very powerful opening sentence. Chapter 1, Mama's Bladed Hands. The first weapon I ever held was my mother's hand. I was a small child then, soft at the belly. On that night, my mother woke me and led me out to the Carolina woods, deep, deep into the murmuring trees, black with the sun's leaving. The bones in her fingers, blades in sheaths, but I did not know this yet. We walked until we came to a small clearing around a lightning-burnt tree, far from my sire's rambling cream house that sits beyond the rice fields. Far from my sire, who is as white as my mother is dark. Let's stop there. That's the opening of Let Us Descend by Jesmyn Ward. Another book, like Absolution, that is coming up and that I think a lot of people will be talking about. This is definitely going to be another contender for the New York Times Best Books of the Year, the Pulitzer Prize. I would be willing to bet the Women's Prize once that comes around. So that is a book that a lot of people will be rightly talking about. Sing Unburied, Sing by Jesmyn Ward is next. I hauled a copy of Salvage the Bones last month because as I read Let Us Descend and got ready for this, I just realized I've never really owned a copy of any of her books, and I would really like to have them in my library. So I've already read this. So it's another one of the books that I have already read. I read it a while ago. I want to say the year after it was released, and I think it's a tremendous book. Objectively, this is Jesmyn Ward's best book. Salvage the Bones will always have my heart. It's a very difficult book to read because of the things that happen in it. This is a very difficult book in a different way. You can't go wrong with Jesmyn Ward, is the real takeaway here. But I just really wanted to have copies of her books, and now I have these 3. So there are still ones that I need to get at some point, but I'm really happy to have these 3. Here we go. Part ghost story, part road novel, this historic National Book Award winner is a dazzling journey through Mississippi's past and present and an epic tale of hope and survival. Following a family making the trip from their Gulf Coast town to the Mississippi State Penitentiary, Sing Unburied Sing tests the strength of emotional bonds and the pull of our collective history. In a haunted landscape, for a family reeling from loss, the trip is fraught with danger. This gorgeous novel, animated by Ward's lush and vibrant language, is rich with connection, meaning, and healing. This is also published by Scribner, and here is how Sing Unburied Sing opens. Chapter 1, JoJo. I like to think I know what death is. I like to think that it's something I could look at straight. When Pop tell me he need my help and I see that black knife slid into the belt of his pants, I follow Pop out the house, try to keep my back straight, my shoulders even as a hanger. That's how Pop walks. I try to look like this is normal and boring, so Pop will think I've earned these 13 years. So Pop will know I'm ready to pull what needs to be pulled, separate innards from muscle, organs from cavities. I want Pop to know I can get bloody. Today's my birthday. That's the opening of Sing Unburied Sing by Jesmyn Ward, a book I'm really happy to have in my library. We end with God Help the Child by Toni Morrison. So as I mentioned earlier, I have been collecting all of Toni Morrison's books, and this was the last of her fictional works that I needed. The only one I don't have at this point is Recitative, which is it's a short story that was published individually. So I'll keep looking for it, but I, in my heart, feel like the collection is done with God Help the Child. So this is one that I have not read and I would like to get to. I, at some point, would like to read all of Toni Morrison's books. So this will be on that journey at some point. Probably when I finish my Pulitzer Prize project, I will have time to devote to either Louise Erdrich or Toni Morrison. I've already started Toni Morrison, so I feel like I'd probably go with her first. At the center of this novel is a young woman who calls herself Bride, whose stunning blue-black skin is only one element of her beauty, her boldness and confidence, her success in life, but which caused her light-skinned mother to deny her even the simplest forms of love. There is Booker, the man Bride loves and loses to anger, Rain, the mysterious white child with whom she crosses paths, and finally Bride's mother herself, Sweetness, who takes a lifetime to come to understand that what you do to children matters, and they might never forget. I love Toni Morrison. That's why she is an author that I have been collecting. That's why she's an author I want to read all of their books. This edition is published by Vintage, and it's a good book haul for Vintage. Here is how God Help the Child begins. Sweetness. It's not my fault, so you can't blame me. I didn't do it, and I have no idea how it happened. It didn't take more than an hour after they pulled her out from between my legs to realize something was wrong. Really wrong. She was so black she scared me. Midnight black. Sudanese black. I'm light-skinned with good hair, what we call high yellow. And so is Lula Ann's father. Ain't nobody in my family anywhere near that color. Tar is the closest I can think of, yet her hair don't go with the skin. It's different. Straight but curly like those naked tribes in Australia. You might think she's a throwback, but throwback to what? You should have seen my grandmother. She passed for white and never said another word to any one of her children. That's the opening of God Help the Child by Toni Morrison. So those are the 11 books that I've brought into my library in the month of August. Again, I've already read 4. Absolution by Alice McDermott, Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi, Let Us Descend by Jesmyn Ward, and Sing Unburied Sing by Jesmyn Ward. And I am in the process of reading Temple Folk by Aaliyah Bilal. I would love to hear what you think about any of these books. If you have recommendations based on my interest in any of these, let me know in the comment section down below. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.